So, Skip, you mentioned guidelines to address barriers.
Great.
Are there guidelines that can assist with development, selection, and use of online curricular materials so that those materials can be used effectively with the broadest range of students?
Yes, I'm going to reference two sets of guidelines. The first one I'm going to start with really is the CAS developed Universal Design for Learning guidelines. And they're available through the National Center on Universal Design for Learning. And they're categorized into three major columns. There's a sheet that looks a little something like this.
But much prettier.
But much prettier, because this one's not the color version, but downloadable. But it's broken into three categories, so looking at multiple means of representation, multiple means of action and expression, and multiple means of engagement. And the first three items underneath each one of those categories are important to pay attention to. So I'm just going to actually, there are only 9 of them, so I think what I'll do is just read through them so you get a sense of what we're talking about and why we refer to these and kind of use these as checkpoints. So under multiple means of representation, we want to be able to provide options for perception, and the three are options that customize the display of information. So as I get older, I'm discovering that I really like 18-point font better than 14-point font, and I like sans serif as opposed to the little letters that have curlicues on them. Options that provide alternatives for auditory information. There are times when you really want to have text along with the audio stream, and you want to have the option of doing that, of simply turning that on at any time. I'd like to have not just audio, but have text. Options that provide alternatives for visual information. So clearly, it's obvious if you're visually impaired that an image or a graphic needs to be described. There needs to be some sort of text equivalent built in.
So if we think about those related to the barriers that we mentioned, that just attending to those things would provide you with a way to lower some of the sensory barriers, possibly some of the cultural barriers if we look at a second language or multiple
Absolutely.
languages, and then also possibly a bit of the engagement barriers. Because if you can't see it or hear it, you're not likely to be engaged.
You're unlikely to spend a whole lot of time with it, right? So the second category is providing multiple means of action and expression, and this one really focuses, the first three items here really focus on physical action. So I'll just go through these relatively quickly. Options in the mode of physical response. I think Joy mentioned earlier, we talked about individuals who have some physical limitations may have trouble moving a mouse or may have trouble actually using a touch screen. So making sure that interfaces have some logic to them, that there's consistency in the way the interface is set up from a navigational perspective. Maybe there's buttons there that could be mapped to an individual who's using some sort of scanning or a single switch access so that there's a relatively easy way to navigate the environment. And that also tries to, and the second one is options for means of navigation, of not having just one way of moving from page to page, but a few ways. I mean, typically, for example, if you, one way to experience this is looking at a standard web page. When you come to a web page, you can actually navigate in most pages without using the mouse at all, because you should be able to use the tab key to jump from hotspot to hotspot and the enter key to select when you come to a place or hyperlink that you want to choose. You should just be able to push enter. So using that tab enter navigation is kind of standard keyboard navigation that should be
Of course,
followed.
the word should is an important one there.
Right, it is. But in most publicly available web pages, you're going to find that the tab enter navigation works pretty well. And then the final one is options for accessing tools and assistive technologies. I mean, assistive technologies, and I'll defer to Joy to talk more about this, but tend to be really individual selections that help facilitate your learning and your access to the world. And the important thing is making sure that whatever supports or hooks are built into an operating system or are there and expected to be used by assistive technologies, that those remain in whatever product you're currently using.
Yeah, and so there you end up both with your content issue and your technology issue. That the hooks, if you will, let's get mentioned, have to be built into the content as it's actually being developed, so that if someone needs to use an alternate input device, that alternate input device actually has a way to connect. And I'm not talking about physical connection, but For example, if there is a spot on the screen that is either supposed to be clicked on or touched or whatever, that there's some coordinate that an assistive technology device could recognize so that it could go right to that particular place. It may take some programming on the part of the device to interface, but it wouldn't be as though there's simply no keyboard alternative. Keyboard alternatives are a really important thing when you look at interfacing, I think, with assistive technology.
Absolutely, and you want to make sure that whatever's developed doesn't override that. So going back to that simple kind of tab enter navigation, every browser you use is going to assume that using the tab key is going to move you from hotspot or hyperlink to hyperlink across a web page. It is possible through programming to say, no, we're going to use tab to bring up dictionary definitions. But if you do that, you're going to violate user expectations and, in fact, violate how some of the assistive technologies actually, what they're looking for and how they work. Great.
So then the other thing I think that's important to think about when you think about the assistive technology is does the screen have to be bigger? Or perhaps there is a device that's being used that has no screen at all. So is there, if indeed the person needs a visual input, is there some way to provide that visual input for someone who perhaps has low vision? Or is there auditory output that totally supports and is actually equal to the visual input? That I think would be important. So what about engagement?
So engagement. So provide multiple means of engagement. Third principle in ViewDL. The focus here really is providing options for recruiting interest. So it's not only recruiting interest in many ways, but it's sustaining interest. So we're looking for getting a student into the process of learning, but also sustaining their attention as they move through it. So I'm just going to go through these three pretty quickly. Ideally, we're looking for options that increase individual choice and autonomy. And in some ways, that can tie to some of the other guidelines and checkpoints. I know that if I have the option, if a page is very busy, and I can either minimize the images on that page, get a text, increase the size of the text, or change the background to dark blue and have yellow text on it, then that's going to sustain my interest because I'm engaged in the process and I can modify what's there. Options that enhance relevance value, and authenticity, and that really goes to trying to find ways instructionally to tie it back to what the students already know. So tapping background information. And finally, options that reduce threats and distractions. And a lot of that minimizing of threat can be achieved by having flexible options for presenting information and for having students express themselves. So not just in written fashion, not just in audio, maybe by doing graphics, just a variety of different ways.
And then also, of course, providing levels of support. So that your levels of support would be different depending on, I may engage you quickly, but if I'm not supporting you to be successful as you move through, perhaps if there's, as a quick example, if there were someone who had difficulty beginning a written response to something that they're learning, may need a sentence starter or may need a fill in the blank or something like that as a way to support them moving forward. So as we think about this in summary, as Skip said earlier, the point of our talking with you today is not to say, oh my goodness, online curricula are of great concern. It's to say that the informed person knows that indeed there are ways to lower barriers and to increase participation. And one of the biggest ways that can happen is by flexibility built into the actual content itself in the design and flexibility that's built into the technology or delivery system that's involved with using the content or displaying the content, if you will. And so the more flexible the content is in terms of representation of the information, the more flexible ways to engage and respond to the content, and the more opportunities for actions to take place in different ways, the more likely it is to truly make these online curricula meaningful for all learners in the classroom.
Great. So why don't we stop there for a moment, and then we'll pick up again with minimizing barriers during development in the next section.